and why it matters and what you would want to save in the first place, or maybe try to determine why you would want to save something particularly. So I want to leave you with a question here, or at least plant a question in your mind so that as we go through this towards the end of it, that you really kind of figure out your answer to that question. And that question is, what varieties would benefit me the most to save seeds from year to year, and which seeds would be the easiest to save this year for your own needs in your own garden? Because you really do want to make it something that's worthwhile for you, something you eat regularly that's worth the extra effort. All right. So I'm going to go into why we would save seeds. So there are direct actions that come from saving seeds. One is improving local food security, and that's really one that I'm really passionate about, in that each incremental thing we do, and if we share it outwards, it can really help stabilize food security in some way in our local communities and beyond. And one of the things that I'm focused on is what I call localizing the varieties, or selecting off the breed to grow well in our climate. And when something like that's shared outward, it does make an effect, because we can, other people in the community can grow more vegetables with less space, less time, because it's very productive for our local area. We can also protect and preserve pollinators, local pollinators, by providing habitat and forage. You may not think that's a big thing incrementally with one plant, but it adds up over time, and it adds up with the different varieties that you put out there. One thing that I love to put out, for instance, that makes a difference in the early spring is arugula. If I have arugula out, it basically living over the fall, which is kind of what you want to do to get seeds anyway. It's going to flower really early in the spring. And sometimes I'll actually put some in the greenhouse and sort of coax them to survive the winter, and put them out right away, so that mason bees and some of the bumblebees in really early spring have something to eat. Arugula is a really good, nutritious food for them right off the bat. So definitely giving a little love to pollinators is a big benefit of this. And there's another thing to think about, is like carrots and radishes and beets, lettuce, stuff like that produces a lot of flowers. Like, they get pretty decent sized heads with a lot of little flowers. It provides a lot of forage for bees. So you want to kind of leave a few plants there. At the very least, if you're not saving seeds, maybe leave some of the not so good plants to just flower out for the insects to enjoy. You want to do the exact opposite though if you're saving seeds. You want to leave the very best out there, or at least the ones that provide the traits that you're looking for. And you'll hear me repeat that a few times throughout the talk. We can also protect and preserve local bird populations too as well. I don't know if we have any birders in the audience, but birds are kind of important for gardening. And some people think birds are not good for gardening, or they're annoyed that the birds will peck holes in their tomatoes during the middle of summer when it's really dry. So some things you can do, like in that case, is put a little bowl of water out, or some kind of water source that's reliable for the bees and other insects as well as the birds. If you give them a water source, they're really not going to damage your produce much, if at all. And sometimes, believe it or not, the birds are actually eating mosquitoes off your tomatoes. Mosquitoes love to eat the nectar off of tomatoes that kind of comes out of the pores. So if you look really closely, you'll actually see mosquitoes flying around your tomatoes a little bit from time to time. So there's actually reasons why that all occurs. We just need to provide a little more love for our birds and our bees out there, and they will return a lot for us. They actually become invested in your property. They live there, they raise their young, and they're relying on your garden as a food source. So they actually become invested, and you'll see behavior differences in birds, believe it or not, over time as they become invested in your garden, if you pay attention to that kind of thing anyway. You can save a lot of money too, depending on what you do. In my case, it saves me quite a lot of money, but I'm growing 35 different pepper varieties and a number of tomatoes and a lot of other stuff. So that kind of adds up if you need to buy those seeds. And I may not grow more than 2 to 6 or 12 or 18 of any particular variety, but it still adds up over the course of time. And there's also the benefit, again, of localizing. You can improve your health with, of course, eating a good organic produce produced right from your garden. You know what went in it, you know all your inputs, and you can also pick it right out of the garden and bring it to the table. This is something huge that we do with lettuce. We'll pick lettuce literally right out of the garden or out of the greenhouse and put it on the table. So there's only a couple minutes between when it's eaten. You get good vital energy from your plants when you go right from the garden to the table. It's really worthwhile. Plus you get good exercise gardening, at least for 6 months or more out of the year. Still need to keep the gym membership for the winter though. You can create new varieties with traits that you desire. This is really the biggest, or one of the biggest reasons that got me started saving seeds is as I was gardening and started using the produce, I started to desire certain traits out of the produce to make what I wanted to make, whether it was even just dried pepper flakes. That drove me to do some interesting things. There's things like real Thai chilies won't really dry well in our climate unless you cut them open. So I actually was able to select off chilies that crossed with cayennes in such a way that the skin's it dries really well, whole pepper here in our particular climate. So some of it's localizing the grow in the garden, and some of it might be maybe localizing how it dries for you, or how you're going to process it just to make it easier. And you'll find yourself, especially if you're making things like sauces, spaghetti sauce, pepper sauce, pickled things, you'll find yourself really desiring certain traits, especially to make your processing easier. I found that to be the case with jalapenos, for example. Smaller jalapenos are just really difficult to process a bunch of. It's really tedious. So I've really tried to breed a jalapeno that came out very nice and big, thick meat, just super easy to pop the seeds right out of. And it made a world of difference as far as my processing time. That one was pretty challenging though. It took me a long time to stabilize a jalapeno that would grow with everything else I grow it with. And that's an interesting subject that I'll kind of come back to a few times throughout the talk. Because generally the distance isolation that you would use out there recommended, I'm just violating left and right. So there has to be a strategy to that, because otherwise you're just going to get wild cross-pollination. And you think, well, how can you avoid that mess? Well, there are some tips and tricks, and I'll try to provide them to you as we go through here at the right points in time. But really selecting for desired traits is huge. You can massively improve your productivity, the quality, and really maintain the quality much better as well. Especially once you get your lines stabilized to grow with the other things you grow in your garden. And that is important, in my opinion. When you pop something new in, it does take some adjustment to the genetics in your garden. So it's something you have to focus on. One of the biggest aspects of saving seeds, of course, is trying to get the purity of the seeds you want, or the opposite side. If you're looking to create something new, you have to start with a hybrid. We'll get into some of the details there, because there's a lot of details, or at least there's important details that you want to follow when you start all that. One of the more important things too here is to preserve and create biodiversity. So you end up doing a few different things with biodiversity in a way with saving your own seeds. One is that this may seem counterintuitive in some ways, but you're sort of localizing the seed, what I'm trying to do. And in that case, it seems like you're narrowing the genetics a bit. And to a degree you are, but you're not. You're more changing how it's expressing its genetics to best survive in the climate where we are exactly. So it's a build on that. And if, say, for example, if somebody did this at every sort of geographical location in the US, and we had all these different vegetables that were sort of made to grow well in certain climates, we have a lot of environments in the United States. And if we really had localized a lot of different vegetables for all those different climates, that's really a good thing for food security, in the sense that if it shifts one way hard or the other, we can pull seeds from those areas that have that climate and distribute them other places in the country. So it's something to think about in relation to that. You cannot actually narrow your genetics in that case too. So you do have to keep an eye on that in all this. You can't just keep a narrow line of genetics. You do have to introduce other things to it, even if it's sort of under the table and the genetics you want are dominant and end up rolling out and staying the same. You still need to mix other stuff with it. Otherwise, things will thin out over time and really just lose their vigor and so forth, which is really one of the boons for hybrid seeds, or what's one of the advertised benefits of it anyway. Okay, so there's also some social benefits that come from saving seeds as well. You can explore and establish ties to your regional food history, and just the regional food in itself, because we're in a good area for that. I guess really a lot of places in the US are, but we typically all have different foods that are traditionally made in certain areas. Now, a lot of this is certainly from our European backgrounds, and we'd like at the student farm here, they've actually had some native speakers as well, introducing that side of it, which is really interesting and wonderful to combine with this, to get some of the plants that were grown here before the US was colonized is kind of important too, because there's some really old genetics in certain varieties in this country that go back a long ways. You can also share knowledge and deepen connections with your family and community. I know even just within my own family, it's been kind of fun. Certainly there's tedious parts of it, weeding and all that good stuff, which nobody likes to do, but you can really build things, especially if you're creating your own varieties and you really like them. Say you create something, a good tomato or something that your kids really like, build some value within your family when your children actually like something you've grown in the garden, and it kind of becomes something they rely on. That's how you build a family heirloom in a way, and eventually build an heirloom, a seed variety out of it. But that takes a little more time. It's a few generations to technically build an heirloom. Some of the personal benefits from saving seeds are actually kind of interesting, because you wouldn't think about this, but you can actually grow a lot from saving seeds as a human being. Saving seeds is a good way to generate bounty for you and your family. So in other words, you're not just saving seeds, you're producing crops that you eat during that period of time. And that's really how you want to define what you're saving. What would save you money that you don't have to go and buy in the grocery store every 3 or 4 days, or whatever you want for your fresh vegetables? That kind of thing is definitely the first type of vegetable you want to grow, is one that you consume a lot of. And I would put out there that we all eat lettuce in almost everything. It can be an easy one, maybe a little tricky at some parts to start, but if you start with good seed, it's really something you can produce a lot of food for your family. Lettuce is something I can grow year round. During the winter, we have to grow it inside, but I can provide lettuce year round for my family. And just about every meal, we have some of that lettuce. We go and pick it, put it right on the table, and that's good nutrition. And over time, you can get your kids accustomed to very nutritious lettuce, which is not very watery like some stuff you might buy in the grocery store. And they actually appreciate that over time. I guess it's a little conditioning, maybe. You can participate in an ancient tradition. People have been saving seeds. I mean, for as far back as we have written records, there are records of people saving seeds. But I would assume it would go back even farther, even to some degree before we could technically say people were growing wider agriculture or fields full of stuff. They were still saving seeds and this and that from little things that were in their environment and helping them along. So I have an idea that goes back a long time. You can become closer to nature by feeling connected to the land and the life cycles of the plants and the seasons. And it's really a grounding experience to be more connected to your property or just the land in general. And the garden for me isn't just a place to grow food. It's actually where I go to relax, after a hard day's work. So it becomes your sanity as well, quite honestly, in this crazy, high-paced world. It allows us to slow down. Can improve critical thinking skills as well. Who'd have thought? Saving seeds and gardening. Because there's actually, if you think about it, there's a number of critical thinking skills that come into play in the garden. Observation, analysis, interpretation, reflection, evaluation, inference, the conclusion on the basics of evidence and reasoning, explanation, problem solving, and decision making. All those come into play when you're saving seeds. Gardening to a large degree, but when you're saving seeds, it gets a lot more complex. You're laying out your garden and all of it's in relation to other things and what's going to happen in the future. So you really have to think in a long-term sense and be able to, at least in your mind, try to extrapolate what's the downstream consequences of what I'm doing today. So you have to create a theory on that, and then you have to correct yourself when you see if that theory is not correct, which definitely happens in gardening. You have certainly as many failures as you have successes in the beginning of anything that you do, and gardening is no exception. So this is a great point to maybe go into breakout rooms. Now that we've talked about what seed saving can do for you, maybe we can talk about that amongst each other and see if people can contribute what it's done for them so far in their lives. That should be interesting.
All right, yeah, I'm gonna make the breakout rooms now, and they are open. So you should be getting a notice to join your breakout room, and then, yeah, just, do you want to reiterate like the discussion question, just as a reminder really quick before they head out?
Okay, so the discussion question is, think about what you want to actually grow coming out of this talk. What would be interesting to you to grow this year? What seeds do you think you might be able to benefit from and actually pull off saving?
All right, sorry if that wasn't enough time, I'm now realizing, but maybe that can turn this into more of an open discussion that Mark can lead and have maybe people share their answers with the group.
All right, we're gonna go into how to save seeds at this point. And I broke that down into really 7 considerations for success. I'm going to shoot through them real quick just to kind of summarize, and then we can come back through and talk in a little more detail on each one. So number 1 is to start with the right seeds. That's really important, and we're going to spend some time on this because if you don't start in the right place, you're going to really make things hard for yourself. Now, if you're up for it, it might be a really awesome rabbit hole to dive in, but it could be a deeper rabbit hole than you expect. And certainly open pollinated varieties are a great place to start, but we'll swing back to that. Number 2 is to learn about your species. It's really important to know what they do, how they grow, what do they like, what can they cross-pollinate with. Sometimes that'll surprise you. So it's kind of important to figure all that out. So it's really important to know the species in the group and so forth. And there's some charts that hopefully we've gotten up into chat that came from Seed Savers Exchange. And I'm going to reference them for a few things today because it's a really accessible site. They sell seeds, but there's a lot of other places out there that sell seeds. But what's cool about them is they've provided some really good content for people to plug into and hit the ground running. You can plug into it with what specific variety you want, or just, I want to start saving seeds. So these charts came from them. There's essentially 2 of them. One has maturity on it and the other one doesn't. And that will come into that here because when your seeds are mature is kind of important. You need to know that in your planning. In that you've got your specific genus. Well, actually, I'm diving in too deep right now. Number 3 is to pick a few easy varieties that you can use. And I would recommend something you use in your kitchen or your diet regularly, like something you actually eat and care about and like. That's your best starting point because 1, you're more passionate about it. And whenever you taste something you grew, that's something you like, it just is more magical at that point for you. 4 is to plan your garden for maximum return and minimum cross-pollination. And that's really the magic of growing and saving your own seeds. So like I said, I'm just violating the space isolation distances in those charts I referenced all over the place. And you can't generally just do that without expecting massive cross-pollination. And I definitely get it at times, but I'm not saving those seeds unless I actually want to save those seeds. We'll get into that in a bit. So you want to, number 4 is to plan your garden for maximum return and minimum, well, I already did that, so I doubled up on that. My apologies. 5 is to know when ripe produce can be harvested for consumption and when to let go for seeds, or even what to let go for seeds for that matter. That can be a big question, and there's a lot of nuances to that. And then number 6 is going to be know your seeds are mature, when they are mature and when to harvest them. There's definitely some nuance to that. And we're going to look at what varieties are maybe easier for you to deal with as well in that whole thing. And then number 7 is how to process, dry, and store your seeds. Every step is important, but that one's really important because if you don't do that one right, it's going to really lessen the time you have to work with your seeds. You could go from, in some cases, some seeds last 5 years or more. Certainly they lessen in start rate after that point or even leading up to that point, but you can still use those seeds at that. But if you don't store them correctly, you're going to really limit their use to a couple years. And there are varieties that only last a year or so. Like onions are pretty short-lived, and chives and things like that. So the very first thing that we mentioned that I talked about was start with the right seeds. So we're really going to break down what's the difference between hybrid, open pollinated, and an heirloom for that matter. I'll jump into that one pretty quick. So an heirloom is basically an open pollinated seed variety that has existed and is stable enough to have existed genetically for 50 years or more, generally in that range. That's pretty good for something to stay stable for that long, and all the different genetics it's come across and so forth. Now you're going to see some variation in those heirlooms because of localization in different areas. Even where the seed company is growing them, you're going to get a little bit of localization in a situation like that. But heirloom is a great place to start because they are the most stable seed varieties out there. That's not to say that you could buy any open pollinated seed that could end up being as stable as an heirloom. It's just the heirloom has proved it over time. And genetic stability is not really easy to tell right away. It's not like there's a sign on that thing saying I'm this stable or I'm not stable. You really have to see how genetically behaves over time. And I want to start by really analyzing hybrids in a little bit of detail. Because you can get hybrids in your garden, saving seeds, really easily. In fact, that's a lot of the time what you're trying to avoid if you want to maintain the genetics of particular strains you have. So what's important to know is that the difference between a commercial hybrid and a hybrid you produce yourself from open pollinated seeds, the latter is really what you're after. If you want to produce a hybrid, you want both of those parents, initially anyway, to be from open pollinated stock. One, you're not violating any, licensing or anything, or, any laws in any particular areas. That can vary a lot across the country on how that's all parsed out. But you're also showing a little respect too, because the folks who made those seeds put a lot of time and effort, even if they're a company. There was a lot of research time and a lot of effort put into making them. I can guarantee you that. You get an appreciation for that after you start playing around with it a little bit in your own garden, and you can see where the value is in some of those hybrid varieties. So I'm not here to tell you shouldn't grow hybrids. In fact, there's a few varieties I still grow to this day, even with all the different seeds that I grow. But it's limited in certain varieties. For example, carrots is one of them. I absolutely love a carrot called Yaya, and our kids just go crazy over them. They're very sweet carrots, but it is a hybrid. but they grow really well for us. And I haven't found an open pollinated carrot that beats it yet. So I've certainly tried, no doubt about it. But the thing you really need to know is that hybrids produced out there by companies, seed companies, really what you call commercial hybrids, could be any number of things. And that's the thing, is you don't know what it is. There's a lot of different types of hybrids. You could even cross hybrids with hybrids, or a hybrid with an open pollinated variety. And there are a lot of ways of describing that and different nuances to it. But the fact is when you buy a hybrid seed, you don't know what that history is. And some hybrids are made from crossing different species, and they may actually not even be viable seeds. They may literally be sterile if you try to save seeds from that variety. That's probably your worst case. Another scenario is that it blows all over the place. You don't get anything like what you started with. That's most often what occurs. In some cases, that might be a great place to start from if you want to start in a trench and work your way back out. But if you start with open pollinated seeds and then hybridize them yourself, you have a lot more stability. You know what the genetics is to a degree, and it's really stronger genetics to start with, in that those varieties are much more stable. So you're mixing more stable genes to begin with. Even mixing hybrids, commercial hybrids, is just as bad as trying to save seeds from them. You don't know what you're going to get. It could be really interesting, but the fact is that interesting one might be one in hundreds of plants. The rest might be total mutants that aren't even worth eating or growing to a degree. I have definitely grown some things from similar scenarios, even coming from open pollinated. And I've actually even gotten very stable genetics out of such a combination, but you really have to play it out over the course of years to prove that. And it's really based on what you like. What are you saving? What do you want? That's going to determine what you're even focused on to a large degree. So it's best not to start with commercial hybrid seeds when you want to actually collect your own seeds. That's rule number one. But again, there's exceptions where you may want to have a hybrid variety anyway, but that's one that you're probably going to want to continue to purchase. But hey, it's fun to purchase some seeds, in that I love looking at the seed catalogs just like anybody else does. And I'm always looking for something new and interesting. So I still do buy some seeds, but it's more on the side of looking for something interesting, and it's more open pollinated that I'm buying. But just looking at hybrids can still give you ideas. Looking at the traits, you're still exposing yourself to phenotypes. Because a huge part of this, I'm going to throw a word out there now, that phenotype word. Some of you may be familiar with it, others maybe not. Basically, all phenotype is a visual representation of genes that are represented in the plant. And it's a good way to track what's going on in some senses. You may not know what genes are being expressed there unless you're, a horticulturalist. Not even a master gardener is likely to be going into that depth. But unless you're really breaking apart plant genetics, you're working off of phenotypes. That is your visual cue of what you're seeing. And those are the things that you're actually identifying as things you want as well. Like, I want a pepper that dries well. I want one that's thick and is a cayenne that I can use for sauce. Whereas most cayennes are, really kind of geared towards drying. Things like that can really make a difference for you in your focus. So stay away from commercial hybrids unless that's just what you want, is that particular variety. So if you want to go for something that you want to save seeds, stay in open pollinated. Lean towards heirloom if you can find some that really work for you in that sphere. Okay. Now I want to go a little more forward into learning about your species. And basically, you really want to learn what it is. And those charts are a good place to start. And there's a lot of great information out there on websites that are generalized, and that you can look at, like the charts where you have a lot of varieties in one, or you can drill in to learn about specific varieties. And I really recommend that you do that. And I'd also recommend maybe getting a book about seed saving as well. They're good reference points to start. They'll typically tell you a few different ways to do it. You're going to end up finding the way you want to do it. And it may be what's in the book, or it may be some variation of it. I tend to go a little utilitarian on the seed collecting, in that I'm using like paper plates and paper towels and Trader Joe bags and things like that that I already have in my house and are very inexpensive. So especially in the scale I'm working, it really helps to not, you don't need to go out there and buy something branded to save seeds. Like, that's just quite a waste of money. You do want to, however, get good envelopes for your seeds and things like that. We'll try to get to that in a second. You want to know whether your plants are biannual, perennial, annual, all that good stuff, because that's going to tell you how to stage your garden. Because something like a carrot, if you want to save seeds from a carrot, or even lettuce for that matter, you might plant, say, maybe a dozen of a particular lettuce plant. You don't just want to save the one that's in the most convenient spot for you in your garden to grow up, because it could grow between 2 and 3 feet high, carrots, maybe even 4, and blow out a bunch of seeds and flowers and all that. You want to pick the best plant out of those dozen, say, that really shows the traits that you want to see. And it may be in the most inconvenient spot. So you may run into some of that, but you still have to design your garden in a way where it's going to halfway work out for you, or the best you can extrapolate. So there's a lot of thought that goes into that. So really learn about your species makes a huge difference. Now, picking varieties that are something that you would use. And for beginners, keep it simple if you can. The best thing to keep it simple is saving seeds from self-pollinated varieties. They typically will pollinate, and those are the ones that I really get a lot of mileage out of, and am able to really easily save pure seeds from, or purer seeds. So there's one thing that I'm just going to kind of slip in right now that's really been useful for me to understand, is when you save the seeds. And I'm not talking necessarily like, oh, with peppers, when their peppers are ripe, you can save them. It's a market ripeness. We'll get into that in a moment. But you actually want to think about when you're saving them. For tomatoes, peppers, a lot of stuff that's open pollinated, like I'm not open pollinated, that's self-pollinating. If you get seeds from the first couple pickings, those seeds are going to be very pure genetically in comparison to anything that comes later on, because there's been a lot less bees getting into those flowers. The initial first things you pull off the plant, I know with a lot of tomatoes and peppers that I put out, the first couple of flowers are actually on the plant before I even put them in the garden in some cases, with certain varieties. Those are going to be very pure genetics in those flowers from the fruit that comes out of them. So I save things in the early part of the season to keep them pure. And I look for crosses more later on in the seeds. And that's obviously easier in plants that represent the phenotypes in that cross that year. Corn does that really well. Peppers do that really well. To some degree, even tomatoes do. Where if you can see, oh, wait a minute, that red beefsteak has multicolors from this multicolored German variety I've got over here. You know, they've cross-pollinated. Or I don't know if we'll have time, but I could show you some pictures of some peppers that cross-pollinated. Some habaneros. I'm having some really good fun with those in relation to some new varieties. And 2 of them essentially, towards the fall, they really love to cross-pollinate. And you can really see literally both colors marbled in the pepper. It's very obvious that that one cross-pollinated. I did actually save some seeds from it, but they're not the ones I'm starting. I kind of banked those for if this all goes wrong, that'll be a good place to start from. And those particular genetics had a lot of different pepper shapes in, and so there's a lot to refine off from that particular thing. But easy crops that are self-pollinated are peas, beans, lettuce, peppers, tomato, maybe cilantro. That's a really easy herb. It has a quick life cycle, though. It's going to flower within a month or 2. But then you've got coriander, which is basically the seeds from cilantro. And then you can turn around and keep planting them. Some things you want to plant in cycles like that, like lettuce. growing it year round, I'm planting new lettuce seeds roughly every 3 to 5 weeks. And they're getting transplanted till the other ones get too big, come out and go outside. There's a cycle to it. Cilantro is kind of like that. But you're going to find certain things like that, lettuce, cilantro, don't grow great in the very heat of the summer. So despite your best efforts, you're going to get less during that period of time. But if you put stuff out, it's still going to come on the fall and give you a nice second or third harvest out of that space. So that's another thing too, is if you have a limited space like I do, stack things. And I don't mean on top of each other, but from a time perspective. If I can get this thing in this spot, it comes out. I got a couple more months there where I can get something that's quick in there. Radishes, beets, you can have them grow full maturity in like a month and a half, 2 months. So you can utilize some space in that way to get a lot more out of your garden. But you do want to think about how is it going to cross-pollinate with stuff like beets and Swiss chard, for instance, can cross-pollinate. You may come up with something really interesting there, but I don't know if it's going to be something you're going to want to eat. So there's also some other crops that aren't self-pollinated, but are more in the realm of something that's easy to save though. But they are wind or, well, probably mostly you would say insect pollinated by bees and other insects. Got watermelon, squash, melons, pumpkins, cucumbers, radishes, turnips, sunflowers, sweet potatoes, Swiss chard, kale, arugula, tatsoi, radishes, beets, spinach, onions, chives, carrots, basil, dill. Those are all fairly easy things to a degree to save seeds from and keep going in your garden. Things like dill, and if you get the right variety of that, and if you get things localized, some of this stuff will just reproduce itself. I save dill seeds, but I don't really ever plant them because they come up anyway, which leads me to one other thing I want to mention. When you're pulling your weeds in the spring, whether it's early spring, mid-spring, or late spring, different things come up. And don't consider everything that comes up, even volunteers from seeds that you may have missed that hit the ground, don't consider them as trash. Give them a chance a little bit. Maybe you want to pull a lot of that stuff out, but if something catches your eye for some reason, give it a chance. One of the best lettuces I'm growing right now was a volunteer, and it's a very strong, that one volunteer was a very strong hybrid. And even the F2s off of it are much bigger than regular lettuce plants. And I've developed a purple Thai chili off of that turns purple very quickly. Really nice dark purple throughout its lifespan, and then it turns red at the end. That actually came from a volunteer from the year before, and that one was easy because I could see the purple in the leaves actually expressing. So I could see that phenotype, and I knew that it came from the purple jalapeno I had grown the year before. I thought, that's interesting. Let's see what happens. And now I actually have a line of it that I really like and grow every year. So you can really go far with some of the stuff if you get creative, but it's all based around what you want, but your observation is huge in this. And don't just throw everything away. You can't hoard everything either, right? Not even seeds and not even plants in your garden, but just if something looks interesting, give it a few days, give it a week or two and see what happens to it before you pull it out. You can always yank it later. You can find some very interesting stuff. Now, then you've got to work with that, and you've got to, bring it into fruition. It takes years to maybe get like that purple Thai chili to get it fully stabilized. It's not there yet, but it's still a great pepper. And I look forward to it stabilizing. It looks like this would be a great opportunity to go into a breakout room. Looks like I totally killed the time here. Unless we just want to go into Q&A because we're at 15 minutes ago. I'll let Meg call that one.
It seemed like people enjoyed the breakout room the last time, so I think we should do that, and we'll give it a couple minutes, and then it'll still be about 10 minutes for any questions that people have at the end, and they can start to think of those. So, let's see.
And there's no doubt that from a content perspective, like I'm barely even covering a quarter of what I've got in this with the time we have here. So there's a lot more details. Right. Hopefully it helps make it accessible to you in some way.
The breakout rooms are open again if you want to reiterate like last time as people leave.
Yep. Let's think about what you might want to grow yourself and what you could successfully save seeds from this year, based on what space you have and what time you have. And that's a good thought to go out. All right. I guess at this point we could go into some Q&A with what time's left. I don't know how long you plan to go with this thing, Meg. I mean, I'm okay to go longer, but I don't want to push your boundaries beyond what you guys want to do.
Yeah, I can only stay until 7, but that's just
Okay.
me. I can leave the Zoom meeting open, make you the host, and anyone who's interested in continuing this discussion, please feel
Okay.
free to stay on as long as you'd like. So,
All right.
and segue in with that, people feel free to ask your question out loud, or if it's easier to articulate it typed out, that's fine too.
Okay. Go ahead, Karen. You'd raise your hand. Oh, let me unmute you. There
Okay,
you go.
can you hear me now?
Yep.
I just have a quick question. Well, one, I just want to thank everybody for having this and offering it out to the World Wide Web here, because I'm in the Poconos and I actually get to get excited about seeds and stuff like that. But my daughter is actually at graduate school at Penn State, and she was thinking about doing a plot on campus, and she wasn't able to make it. So I said, I'll find out. So does Penn State have, I mean, she's really like, this will be her first summer, on Penn State's main campus. Is there a plot that she could help somebody with? I don't think she's ready to do the full, responsibility. She kind of asked me and said, do I know anybody? I said, no, Grandma, but Grandma's in Iowa. But
I have a feeling the Student Farm Club itself is a good candidate for that, but Meg, Leslie, or anybody want to chime in?
Yeah, so the first thing that came to my mind, you can definitely, the easiest way would probably be to email me or something. I don't know. We'll get her connected with the Student Farm Club, because something that we have as a project team is our rooftop garden. And we have someone on exec who manages that, and I'm sure they would love and appreciate the help. And there's always something, if there's interest, and with the summer being so great, even if there are less people on campus, I think there's always interest in continuing it. So I'll just private message you my email to make sure that she can get connected with us, because that sounds right up our alley.
Excellent.
that would be great. She would really like it. I appreciate that. Thank you so much too for everything.
This is a good opportunity to mention that the Student Farm Club's having a plant sale coming up, and they're also involved in a seed swap where you can actually get some seeds. And I'm going to try to donate as many seeds as I can to that here in the next week. So you might even be able to get some of my seeds from the seed swap. I'll, of course, give you the more stable stuff, not something that's in development. But maybe, Meg, maybe you can let folks know some more details revolving around those two events, or well, the one's more of an initiative than an event.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the Student Farm website, that would probably be the easiest thing, Student Farm Penn State, to just Google it and we'll be right there. And one of our top announcements, our blog post that we have right now, is all about the community seed swap happening the entire month of April. So just like as a little overview, I have the locations to the left there, but that can be found with that link, or just looking up the Penn State Student Farm website, like I said. And then the other thing, I can just talk about it right now, is this that we have on Monday, Ends and Stems. It's basically talking about reducing food waste in your cooking, and that'll be on Monday, our very next event that we have coming up. So we wanted to give that a little bit of a promo. And then for more information on the Student Farm plant sale, that's still in progress. We don't have any big graphics for that yet or anything. But just to keep an eye out, I would say definitely on our Facebook page, if you search Student Farm Penn State, or just frequently check in on the website. And if you're on our community or student listservs, I'm sure you'll be hearing about it once we're ready to make big announcements like that. But you'll definitely hear it. If you're looking towards the Student Farm at all, we'll definitely make the plant sale a big deal, and we want everyone to be able to partake in that as well. So those are
Excellent.
my little announcements.
It's good stuff. I'm pretty excited that you guys are doing that, especially the swap. I mean, the plant sales, tremendous. That's a huge boon for the community to be able to go and support the student farm club and get plants grown from these fine folks is awesome. I actually did give them one pepper variety for the plant sale. If you're interested, it is a sweet Thai chili. Get some nice peppers about yay long, about that big on top, come down to a point, little line down the middle. It's a pretty pepper, but it's got some nice thick meat and a really nice chili flavor. No heat whatsoever in that one. It's a very nice pepper. That one was a happy accident back a few years back, but it stabilized pretty quickly. I love to call those happy accidents. It's like a little reference to Bob Ross there, if you know that reference. But it's some of the best things that you're going to come across are happy accidents, which is why I wanted to promote just observation, even in pulling weeds. I've literally had my hands on something and had gotten it to the point of just about to put the tension to pull it out of the ground and turn back. And some of that's actually turned into some reasonable stuff, especially on the herb side. Like this year, we've got a oregano cross that came out from it's like 4 different types of oregano. I think it's more of a Greek and an Italian cross, but it volunteered right beside our greenhouse, and it is really doing well. So that's in my opinion a very good, at the very least, localization of one of those oreganos. But I've been growing some of the oreganos that I have. I've been growing for 6, 8, 10 years, depending on which one. So it's great to mention about herbs that herbs are really harder to grow from seeds. Some may be easier than others, but they vary so much from seed to seed. Even out of a pack of basil, you may get 1 out of 20 plants that you prefer that one like way over the rest of them. That's the one you want to get seeds from in basil. But when it comes to oregano, rosemary, things like that, if you can keep them alive, you're better off. You can certainly try to get seeds from them, but that is a bigger process and harder to get, like from oregano. Those seeds are tiniest little things, but you can keep that oregano going, and you can, as it grows out, it'll root, and you can then take cutting, not essentially a cutting, you're really just cutting it off. It already has roots, so it's already sort of replicated itself. You're better off to go that route with some herbs. Now, rosemary doesn't do that, but you can get seeds from rosemary in the 2nd or 3rd season, depending. Most of them will seed in the 2nd season, but to get one that'll survive, you've already crossed a big hurdle right there. You've got one that genetically is sort of already localized to some degree in its own. It's like, I've been growing rosemary for, probably 12 or 14 years. And last year was the first year I ever had rosemary survive outside. In other words, not in the greenhouse. Like, I've been overwintering all the rosemaries I've gotten seed from in the greenhouse, and they do just fine. But to have one, and not just one, a number, and that may be an indication of climate change, I don't know, but I've had a number. It's also could be an indication that my seeds are getting more localized from those rosemaries that I'm selecting off from year to. Well, it's not a year-to-year thing. Some of these are, you're lucky to get those seeds every couple of years, because the plant has to take 2 years to produce them. So the last good rosemary seeds I had were from 2018, and I'm trying like heck to get good ones now. I thought I'd get them last year. It was the 2nd year, so it looks like it's a 3rd year flowering on what I've got out there now, which is kind of interesting. So you try to catch them when you can. And fortunately, a lot of seeds are good for 3 to 5, maybe more years if you preserve them correctly. So I figure I've got a 5-year turnaround on anything, roughly 3 to 5 years, that within that period of time, I've got to get new seeds from that one thing, which doesn't mean I need to get seeds from everything every year. But obviously, the more it goes, the more chance for human error. And you do have to take precautions. Like, I'm now putting things in, not so much spreadsheets. I do all my stuff out of OneNote. But I've got a crazy garden database in OneNote, and it still isn't, I would say, less than a quarter of the data in my head, but at some point you've got to get it down there just so you remember some of the finite details. Like, when did I plant stuff last year? I'll make a chart with everything I intend to plant, with some columns on when I put the seeds in the ground, when they came up, when I transplanted them, and all that stuff. And I'm trying to wrap myself around that to be able to get more accurate with that from year to year. And it's necessary because I'm getting into all the stuff I'm growing. It's getting hard to get everything done at the right time and get it out as early as I'd like to. I used to get stuff out and push it out every year a little earlier, but I've had to back off some of that. But that's, what pushes your localization and what pushes the genetics a little bit to, and quite honestly, you can do environmental conditioning in those ways. Heat or cold conditioning are great examples of that. Like the one pepper I was talking about earlier. It's this sweet little orange pepper that has no heat, and it's just a wonderful flavor. I kind of do both ends of that with environmental conditioning. There's some I grow out in the garden, but there's some I grow in the greenhouse, and they stay in the greenhouse. And I just have a little 6 by 6 glass greenhouse in the background there. You see it. I'll keep them in there all summer long. So they're surviving in that 100+ degree heat in the top of that greenhouse. They need a lot of water, but they can survive it. And I keep pushing them that way. And then I grow them into the fall as far as I can, until I really have to shut the heat off, or it just doesn't make any sense. And I just heat it a tiny bit into maybe November and December a little bit, but then I can stretch the peppers out. And then, it's just the plants going a little longer on both sides. Those kind of things can make some difference. Lettuce, it really makes a difference to environmentally condition. I've grown lettuce in the greenhouse over winter and taken what survived. And like the first year I did that, admittedly, it was, maybe a quarter of the plant survived. But then the next year, almost all of them survived. And then this year, they all survived, and they're big. And like, we literally got lettuce out of the greenhouse to eat from mid-January through to the end of March. And it was just because I had to kind of clean things up where I'm starting seeds and all that, where we usually grew lettuce, but we had gotten a bug infestation. So I kind of had to, little advice, don't bring anything back in when you take it out. If you're starting your own seeds, because you don't want to mess things up so that you have a bug infestation and then are spreading bugs all over, and you can't even give stuff to people. Like, it could be thrips or, who knows? I mean, you can get stuff in the fall, aphids, whatever. You don't want to bring that kind of thing into your space. So don't bring things back in unless you absolutely have to. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Looks like Bina, if I pronounce that right. Let me get you the ability to unmute here.
Okay, hi. My name is Bina.
Bina.
Yeah. So quick question. I came in a little bit late and then I was bouncing in and out. But I'm not sure if you spoke about hydroponics a bit. I'm curious if any seed saving that you've done with the hydroponic setup, how they perform when you put it in, traditional soil, and also vice versa, how traditional soil seed savings have done in a hydroponic setup.
I haven't really done too much in relation to hydroponics in a longer term scenario, but I have taken cuttings and rooted them in a similar way that you would going into hydroponics. But I can maybe speak to, like I said, I grow lettuce all year round, so we're growing it inside and then taking it out. Like, that's something I've actually had to genetically, well, basically we're selecting it first for indoor growth. So most lettuce does not actually grow well inside. Just under LED lights. So narrowing that down was huge. When you get a nice little set of them, then you can work your way out from there. But you're going to want to definitely work your way from the hydroponics out. You're going to want it to be something that does good in your hydroponic setup, and then take it out to the garden, and then kind of go from there in selecting what does well in the garden. Like, say if you take, again, like maybe 6 or 12 plants you grew of the one variety inside hydroponically and took them out, save seeds from the one that performed the best. And you'll over the course of a few years, you'll actually see that get better and better, and you'll see the performance start to equalize on both ends to where it's performing well on both ends. At least that's my thought anyway on that, of taking a similar strategy.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to ask a question? All right. Well, I could probably go on for hours, so I don't really want to do that to y'all. If there aren't any questions, I feel like we could probably end the meeting, but I'm glad to answer any questions or talk more about a particular subject if somebody's interested. There's certainly a lot of details were left out.
Mark, were you gonna maybe throw your email in the chat for anybody who wanted to compare notes further?
Yeah, I can do that at this point. For the folks that have hung around, let me give you. I'll give you my Penn State email address, only because that's the only one I'm responsible with, I'll be honest with you. I mostly just get junk in my personal email. I would hate to miss somebody if they were reaching out or having any questions. And I may respond back to you from the personal email, but I give you a heads up if that's the case. You're welcome on the information. And again, this was just like such a high level view and brush over. I actually probably had 10 times the amount of information in what I was looking at. But in such a short period of time, it's hard to kind of cover all that detail. There's a lot of rabbit holes, let's say, and some of them go pretty deep. But I think the things we covered at least were getting people in the right direction with what kind of seeds to get initially. But there's a lot of details with specific varieties and when to pick and all that good stuff. Yeah, go ahead again. Okay. See if I can get you unmuted.
Okay. Thanks again.
Welcome.
Another question. I mean, this is less about seeds. It's more just about just growing in general. I work at a high school and we actually have a garden.
Okay.
But
Kudos to
between
you guys.
thanks, but between the
Great to see.
pandemic and then winter hitting and everything else,
Yeah.
going back to it, I know everything's probably going to be devastated, and you know, by the time we start getting stuff down, it's probably a little late in the, you know, starting to grow from seed.
Yeah.
Are there particular varieties of plants that specifically vegetation, edible plants,
Right.
that you would suggest that would, you know, still be viable, even though we would be starting like late in starting from seeds and get everything set up?
Yeah, I would tend to like peas are going to be something good. I would tend to err on things that you can also do fall crops of as well. Like tomatoes and peppers are probably not going to be good in that they take such a growth period to get to the point where they even want to flower. Well, I shouldn't say want to flower, but you know, to really produce fruit well, it takes a couple months to get them going. And same kind of with garlic, like cilantro is a good herb, but then you're not going to get many kids probably liking that to a large degree. So
we're in New York. We're actually in the South Bronx, so we actually
okay,
yeah. So a lot of kids they like cilantro just because
nice.
just historically, like from their cultural backgrounds, the
Oh,
foods that
beautiful.
they use. You know,
Excellent.
they use a lot of that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm obviously speaking to just, you know, what I'm used to in the area I grew up, but that's great to see kids into cilantro at an early age. That's a really good one. And the cilantro is a very quick turnaround. You get the seeds, you know, it's coriander as well. It's good stuff. And I love it. We eat a lot of that. So arugula is a really good choice as well. Kale would probably do well. To some degree, it's nice to actually plant some fall kale. With the variety I've been growing for a few years, I've been having trouble getting it to survive the winter to get seed from it. And it's really because if I plant it too early, it's grown up too much, and that particular variety does not do well with a long stem in the winter. It'll die off. And some do a lot better, but planting some of that stuff in the fall, radishes and beets, spinach, very quick turnaround on those crops. You're talking like anywhere from 45 to 60 days. Onions, definitely not. That's something that takes a lot longer. Carrots, I don't know if that would be good or not. Kind of depends. Some of them you can do some fall carrots for sure, especially if you're picking them a little younger. They're still pretty good at that point. But I definitely err on like the green side, and peas. Cucumbers, maybe, but it depends when you get them started, since they're not really that cold hardy. But often if you get them later, you will have a good growth spurt in the fall though, because they do like to grow pretty well in that sort of transition period. They do well under the heat as well, but I'd probably stick more towards the greens area if you can, because of the quick turnaround on those crops, especially lettuces. You'll be able to get a lot more usable content out of them. But, even basil and some of the herbs, some of the quick growing herbs. I wouldn't bother with rosemary or oregano or anything like that, unless you can, grow it throughout the winter. Some of those things will grow nicely if you have, quite honestly, even window lighting and some lighting in a classroom is good enough for some herbs to grow. They don't require, well, I shouldn't say that. It kind of depends, Some basils will really want to grow out if you're on the north side. You really kind of want a south-facing kind of window. But I'm kind of picturing school rooms usually having a good bit of glass.
Ours are outside. We have I think about 10. I think they're about 10-foot or 12-foot beds.
Okay.
But yeah, so we have those. But I think like what you discussed earlier about rosemary and being, something being able to go through the winter.
To live through the winter, right?
Yeah, I gotta check, because we had some rosemary that's gone through a couple of winters. So nice. I mean, with all this neglect, this past year plus, I'm hoping that there's still a little bit that we can salvage and just propagate.
Hopefully that's the case. I know last summer was bare with that drought. That's probably the only thing that gets you if it managed to keep enough water. Fortunately, rosemary can be pretty resilient at that level. It can dry out a good bit and not be, not have it put the nail in the coffin, so to speak, as quickly as many other plants. It's a lot more resilient in relation to that. So you might be all right. That's a beautiful thing. I mean, I always get really excited about rosemary when they live over, and it's a beautiful thing, because those are exceptional plants that you have right there.
Well,
they really are. You're welcome.
I'll if I get anything started, see what it is, maybe I'll take pictures and shoot you through Penn State.
Oh, that'd be great.
So,
and hey,
thank you.
The greens, especially ones you can freeze. I don't know if you have the ability to do that in classroom, but that's where like spinach and kale and Swiss chard are really good. Things, if you can get a bulk in, you don't have to eat it all at once. Whereas lettuce, frozen lettuce isn't that great. I've tried, it doesn't work.
Well, all right, thanks again.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions at this point? All right. You think here for some other little bit of really good information I could give you that would have some value. Let's say, again, referencing those seed saving charts, learning when things ripen. Maybe one thing I didn't get to mention was seeds was market compared to aftermarket. So you have a market point for fruit, and essentially when you would eat something is this market point from a produce perspective. And then, so its maturity is based on market, whereas your seed could be either at market or aftermarket. In some cases, some are listed as both. And really that can vary depending on the variety. Whereas Yeah, I'm trying to think of some offhand, but having trouble. Some varieties, even if they are listed as both, you're better off to use them as aftermarket and let them go a little longer, let the seeds get a little more mature. I'd like to point out that some things you pick at market maturity, like tomatoes and peppers. And so essentially when you would eat them. So if you're processed, like when I make hot sauce, I'm processing the peppers. I just save the seeds right out at that point because I'm cutting them out of them anyway. And tomatoes, same thing. It's a great point. For tomatoes, it's an awesome point to collect the seeds if you're processing them to make sauce or to can the tomatoes themselves, or to, well, not so much if you're freezing them, you want to leave them whole at that point, but it's a great point to be able to get a bunch of seed out, run them through a screen, pat them dry and put them on a plate for a specific variety, and you can get a nice bulk amount. Otherwise, with tomatoes, you're pulling them out of a tomato at a time as you eat it. And it's a great way though to get, you know, that was the best tomato ever. Okay, but you're going to get like 25, 30 seeds out of it or whatever. You know, but generally you're going to want to get more than that. So that's a good point to get them. Cucumbers, things like that, you really do want to let them go way beyond when you would eat them. And I mean, way beyond. Like when we would pick a cucumber to eat it, those seeds are never going to grow. Some cucumbers, in fact, the ones that are the greatest to eat at that point, barely even have seeds. So you want to let those grow. Like a typical cucumber, like I've grown some pretty large ones, but I like typically the ones I pull seeds from are like this long and like that big around, and you know, they go from green to yellow, and I get them to where they're kind of, you know, getting soft and almost ready to rot, and that's when I get the seeds out of those, cut them open and pull them out onto a plate. Well, I'll rinse them through a screen, you know, just get the goop off of them, and then pat them dry and put them on a plate and just let them sit. It's good to dry your seeds also. This is a good tip in an area where the moisture is leaving. And like top of your refrigerator is a great point for that. Your fridge gives off a little residual heat. It's not a lot these days compared to older ones, but nevertheless, it's giving off a little bit of heat. There's no moisture staying on top of your refrigerator. It's always being dissipated. Even sitting on top of like a computer case or something weird like that, it's giving off some residual heat, believe it or not. Or above, if you have lights that you start plants on, or you're growing lettuce inside or something, if you have a little space in between or anything where you can get a little residual heat off those lights, you don't want it to be too much, but a little bit of heat will push the moisture away and allow you to get your seeds at that 8 to 10% humidity level to save them. That's really critical. No matter how you save your seeds, you want to get that humidity to 8 to 10%, especially if you freeze them, because you'll essentially kill them if you leave too much moisture in there. So they'll go from being able to be saved the longest in freezing to basically not being viable if you don't have them dry enough. So that kind of stuff's pretty important also. But knowing whether something is market maturity or after market maturity is important for planning your garden as well, like that example of the lettuce or carrots. It's after market maturity. You need to have it in a place where you can let some of that go and not be in the way. So that comes into planning quite a bit. And then you definitely have the dry fruit crops compared to wet fruit crops with market maturity. Most dry fruit crops, it's always or almost always after market maturity where you're getting your seeds. There are a few minor exceptions to that. But the wet fruit crops can go either way. Peppers and tomatoes, of course, being the quickest ones. Otherwise, there can be some real nuances. Like lettuce is something that's listed as an easy thing to grow and an easy thing to get seeds from. But this is a great example of waiting to the right time to get your seeds. The first few times you take seeds from lettuce, you're likely to get them immature, because you'll get it to where they're growing up and they flowered and it's got a little sort of fuzzy white thing poking out of it, almost like a dandelion thing. You're thinking, oh, that's done, you know. You just let it go a little bit further. You know, you want that white thing to fall off, and it kind of creates a little pod there in a lot of lettuces. You want it to actually swell up. If you get it when that little fuzzy thing's sticking out, the little white head, it's not as fully rounded and filled out They're actually immature at that point. You want to let the seeds go till it rounds out nice. At that point, they look like brown and dead, and but that's the point you want. If the sweet spot is right before they open up. So if you see some start to open up and others that are still closed, that's a great time to take it. But if you get lettuce that's really productive from a seed perspective, it's not like it's all going to go at once. You may have to. We had an amazing lettuce last year that just the seed head on that was one little branch off the side was as big as a normal lettuce seed head. It was crazy. It was like over 10 times as big. That thing we were picking seeds off of for, I don't know, a month and a half, maybe 2 months. It was crazy. It went for a long time. We literally got, oh my gosh, bags of seeds off of that. Well, shouldn't say bags. I mean, they're unprocessed at that point. I feel like I should probably let y'all go at this point if there's no additional questions. All right. Thanks so much for the folks who stuck around. I really appreciate that. Again, this was just a slice of the information. Probably not even a quarter of what I have in the data for the talk. We could do a whole series of these, quite honestly, and get into little sections of them and get a little more detail. All right, thanks everybody.